Rookies pointed a gun at the black woman's head and learned. Why you should never threaten a Navy SEAL. Are you afraid to look at me now? The cadet's voice echoed arrogantly and cry across the training yard as he held the training pistol against her temple. Around her, a dozen young men in uniform burst out laughing, taunting her further, their voices echoing off the walls of the military center. But she didn't blink, didn't move an inch. Her jaw was locked, her eyes fixed ahead. Not a flicker of fear on her face, just a suffocating absolute silence. And that made them laugh even louder. "Come on, she's frozen," shouted one of them. "I thought SEALs were tougher than that," added another. Provoking a new wave of cruel laughter, the cadet with a gun leaned closer, whispering contemptuously, "Look at her. All that training and she can't even take a little joke." Commander Tiffany. Ross was 34 years old and never imagined that an undercover observation mission would become such a brutal life lesson. The first black woman Navy SEAL to lead special operations in 3 different war zones. Her file was classified at such a high level that half of the instructors at the base didn't even know who she really was. She had been sent to that academy on a temporary mission just to observe, to blend in. No insignia on her shoulder, no titles on her chest. Just a silent presence meant to test leadership potential and expose weaknesses where they are best hidden in arrogance. She remained silent all morning, watching the cadets stumble through basic tactical exercises. Their posture was sloppy, their focus scattered, but their attitude that was razor-sharp, presumptuous, privileged, dangerous. And now one of them had the audacity to press a weapon, training or not, to the temple of a combat-decorated SEAL, just to see if she would flinch. "Do you still think this is a game?" she asked, her voice cutting like steel. The courtyard fell into a deadly silence. The other cadets stood frozen, watching. One dropped his water bottle. Another backed away without realizing it. They had been trained to respect rank, to memorize procedures. But this was real. This was war experience transformed into movement. Every inch of her posture screamed combat experience. The way she breathed, the way her muscles twitched imperceptibly, the way her eyes calculated distances and angles without blinking, "That was a rubber gun," she said, still motionless. "If it had been real, you'd be scraping your little friend's brains out of your boots." What none of those privileged boys knew was that they were seconds away from discovering why you should never ever underestimate someone just because of their appearance. While they laughed at her supposed vulnerability, her eyes revealed a serenity that only exists in those who have weathered much worse storms and lived to tell the tale. If this story of courage and justice is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple moment of humiliation would become the catalyst for a lesson none of them would ever forget. What happened in the next few seconds completely changed the dynamic of that military courtyard. The cadet holding the training weapon, Tyler Brennan, son of a retired general and accustomed to having all doors open to him because of his last name, began to laugh even louder when he realized she hadn't reacted the way he expected. "Guys, look at this," he shouted to the others, gesturing theatrically. "This lady here must think she can teach us a lesson in morality." "How cute." The other cadets approached in a circle like hyenas surrounding wounded prey. For them, this was just another morning of fun at the expense of someone who clearly didn't belong in that environment. "Seriously, where did you come from?" Another teased, crossing his arms. "Because you obviously don't understand how things work around here, Commander." Tiffany Ross had faced much worse situations than a bunch of spoiled boys playing soldier. At 18, she was the only black woman in her class at the Naval Academy, enduring cruel jokes and constant sabotage from classmates who believed she was stealing a spot that should have gone to a white man. At 22, she led her first mission in hostile territory, saving 7 soldiers from an ambush where the enemies had 3 times as many weapons. At 28, she survived a chemical attack that killed half her battalion, carrying 3 wounded comrades 12 kilometers to safety. And at 30, she received the Medal of Honor for a classified operation that saved hundreds of civilians from imminent massacre, But there in that courtyard, facing the disrespect of young people who had never had to prove anything beyond the name on their ID card, she felt a familiar anger rising in her throat. "Do you have family in the military?" Tyler asked, feigning interest. "Because usually people like you only get in here because of quotas, right?" "Diversity and stuff," the laughter echoed again, but this time with a sharper, more directed cruelty. "I bet you've never held a real gun in your life," added another cadet, gesturing exaggeratedly. "You must have come from one of those social programs." It was exactly this kind of privileged arrogance that Tiffany had been sent to identify and correct. Her official mission was to assess leadership potential among elite cadets. But in reality, she was there to figure out which of these grown children would pose a real danger when placed in command positions over actual soldiers, and now she had her answer. Tyler leaned closer, whispering loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Look, no one here wants to humiliate you unnecessarily. How about you accept that this place isn't for you and request a transfer? It would be better for everyone." "Especially for you," added another, provoking a new wave of laughter. What none of those boys knew was that every word of contempt, every cruel laugh, every gesture of superiority was being carefully filed away in the strategic mind of one of the most lethal and respected women in the U.S. Special Forces. Tiffany took a deep breath, her eyes moving slowly over the group, memorizing every face, every arrogant posture, every condescending smile. "Interesting," she murmured almost to herself. What was interesting? Tyler moved closer, misinterpreting her calmness as submission. "Do you finally understand where you are?" "I understand perfectly," she replied, her voice maintaining that unsettling serenity. "I understand that you truly believe you deserve to be here. Of course we deserve it." Another cadet exploded. "Our families built this institution. Our parents and grandparents served with honor, while people like you, people like me, what?" She interrupted, finally turning to face them directly. The silence was instant and uncomfortable. Tyler swallowed hard, realizing that something in her demeanor had fundamentally changed. "Finish the sentence," she said, taking a step forward. "People like me, what exactly?" None of them could answer. Suddenly the dynamic had completely reversed, and they felt like children being confronted by an adult who had discovered their mischief. It was at that moment that Tiffany decided these boys would learn a lesson they would remember for the rest of their privileged military careers. Each new humiliation they tried to impose only fueled something inside her that these arrogant young men couldn't see, a silent strength being strengthened by the very injustice. They tried to normalize. What those privileged children didn't know was that every act of contempt was writing their own sentence of defeat, and that the real storm was yet to come. The real storm began not with shouting or force, but with silence. Tiffany stood there, unmoving, allowing the weight of the moment to press down on the cadets. Silence has a way of exposing weakness, and in that quiet courtyard, their confidence began to crack. Tyler shifted his stance, suddenly aware of how close he was standing to someone who radiated control without lifting a finger. "You know," Tiffany said calmly, breaking the tension, "combat doesn't announce itself with laughter. It arrives quietly. And the ones who survive are the ones who notice when something feels wrong." She took one slow step forward. The cadets instinctively stepped back. "You surrounded me," she continued, her voice steady. "You mocked me. You pointed a weapon at my head because you thought I was powerless. That instinct targeting what you assume is weak is exactly how soldiers get killed." Tyler scoffed, trying to recover. "You're making this bigger than it is?" "No," she replied. "You made it exactly what it is." She gestured toward the training pistol still in his hand. "In a real operation, your finger placement alone would have gotten your teammate shot. Your stance exposes your ribs. And your situational awareness?" She shook her head slowly. "Non-existent." The laughter was gone now. Faces that had been smug minutes earlier were pale, tight with unease. "Want proof?" she asked before anyone could respond. Tiffany moved in one fluid motion too fast for their untrained eyes. She trapped Tyler's wrist. twisted, and redirected the weapon away from her head. His balance broke instantly. The pistol clattered to the ground as he hit his knees. Gasping in shock, she never raised her voice. "Dead," she said quietly. "You'd be dead. And so would the two men standing behind you." The courtyard erupted in stunned murmurs. Tiffany released him and stepped back, hands open, calm as ever. "That wasn't strength," she said. "That was restraint." Tyler scrambled to his feet, face burning with humiliation. "You assaulted me." "No," she corrected. "I demonstrated consequences." At that moment, the sound of boots echoed from the far end of the courtyard. Every cadet snapped to attention as Colonel Mitchell approached, his expression unreadable. His eyes moved from the dropped training weapon to Tyler's shaken posture, then finally to Tiffany. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. "Yes, Colonel," Tiffany said evenly. "There was—" Mitchell nodded once. "Good, I was hoping you'd say that." The cadets exchanged nervous glances. Whatever they thought this situation was, it had clearly become something far more serious. Mitchell turned to them. "Every one of you believes leadership is inherited," he said. "That respect is automatic. That power comes from a name." He paused, letting his words settle. "You're wrong." He looked back at Tiffany. "Commander, would you care to finish today's lesson?" Tiffany met his gaze, then turned back to the cadets. "Leadership," she said, "isn't proven when you're comfortable. It's revealed when you're challenged. Today you weren't challenged by an enemy. You were challenged by your own character." She let her eyes sweep over them one last time, "and some of you failed." The courtyard remained silent long after she turned and walked away, leaving behind a group of young men who had just learned that arrogance can be far more dangerous than fear, and that true power doesn't need permission to be felt. Asterisk. The silence Tiffany left behind followed her like a shadow as she walked away from the courtyard. Every step echoed with a weight the cadets could no longer laugh off. Behind her, no one spoke. No one dared. Colonel Mitchell remained where he was, watching the group with the cold patience of a man who had buried too many soldiers to tolerate arrogance. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Pick up the weapon," he ordered Tyler. Tyler bent down quickly, his hands shaking as he retrieved the training pistol. The plastic felt heavier than it ever had before. For the first time since arriving at the academy, it didn't feel like a toy. "You think today was humiliating?" Mitchell asked calmly. "This was mercy," no one responded. "You want to know why?" Mitchell continued. "Because in the field, nobody gives you a second chance to learn humility." He turned and followed Tiffany without another word. Leaving the cadets standing in the wreckage of their own behavior, that afternoon the academy buzzed with unease. Rumors spread faster than drill commands. Some whispered that the woman in the courtyard was special forces. Others claimed she was intelligence. A few insisted she was exaggerating, clinging desperately to denial. Tyler sat alone in the barracks, staring at the wall. His friends avoided eye contact. The laughter that had always protected him felt suddenly distant, hollow. For the first time, his last name didn't feel like armor across the base. Tiffany stood in a quiet briefing room with Colonel Mitchell and two senior officers. The door was closed. "The mood was clinical. You saw it firsthand," Mitchell said. "That's not immaturity. That's entitlement weaponized." Tiffany nodded. "They don't just lack respect. They lack awareness. That's dangerous." One of the officers leaned forward. "What's your recommendation?" Tiffany didn't hesitate. "Full review. Behavioral audits. Remove anyone who believes command is a birthright." The room went quiet. "That will cause backlash," the officer said carefully. "It should," Tiffany replied. "If the truth threatens the institution, then the institution needs correcting." Mitchell smiled grimly. "That's why you're here." The next morning began like any other except it didn't. All cadets were ordered into formation before sunrise. No explanation. No warnings. Whispers rippled through the ranks as Tiffany stepped forward, now wearing her full uniform. The medals caught the early light. Impossible to ignore. The realization hit them like a physical blow. This wasn't a visitor. This wasn't a civilian. This was authority. Tyler felt You've been evaluated. Tiffany began, her voice steady and unyielding. Not on your physical performance. Not on your academic scores, but on who you are when you think no one important is watching. She paced slowly in front of the formation. Some of you showed leadership. Others showed fear. And a few of you, she paused, showed something far more dangerous. Her eyes stopped briefly on Tyler. Entitlement, she said. The word landed hard. You believe your future is guaranteed. That your name will shield you? That rule's bend for you? She shook her head. They don't, they break. A screen behind her lit up. Audio played. Tyler's voice echoed across the field, mocking. Dismissive, cruel. Faces went pale. This, Tiffany said, is who you are when you think power protects you? She let the recording stop. In combat, she continued, this mindset kills teams. It fractures trust. And trust is the only thing that keeps you alive when everything else fails. She turned to Mitchell. Proceed? Mitchell stepped forward. Cadets Tyler Brennan, James Parker, Michael Stevens. David Chun step out of formation. Each name felt like a hammer strike. They stepped forward slowly. Exposed. You are hereby suspended pending full disciplinary review, Mitchell announced. Effective immediately. The formation remained silent. No shouting, Mitchell added. No celebration. This is not punishment. This is accountability. The days that followed were relentless. Interviews, reviews, evaluations. Cadets were questioned not just about others, but about themselves, who they followed, why they laughed. When they stayed silent, Tiffany watched it all unfold from the shadows. She wasn't interested in revenge. She was interested in transformation. Some cadets broke down under scrutiny. Others admitted things they had never said aloud. A few surprised everyone by standing up, acknowledging their complicity, choosing to change. Those were the ones Tiffany remembered. Tyler, however, spiraled. His father stopped returning calls. His friends distanced themselves. For the first time, he faced a version of himself without applause. In a private interview, Tiffany sat across from him. You don't hate me, she said calmly. You hate what I represent. Tyler said nothing. I represent effort without shortcuts, she continued. And that terrifies people who've never earned anything. His jaw tightened. You still don't get it, she said softly. This wasn't about race. It was about character. He finally looked up. You destroyed my future. No, she replied. You revealed it. Weeks later, the academy changed. Training shifted. Leadership assessments became constant, not ceremonial. Cadets were evaluated on empathy, accountability, restraint. The weak protested. The strong adapted. Performance improved. Cohesion strengthened, and something rare began to emerge: respect that wasn't forced. On her final day at the academy, Tiffany stood alone on the parade ground at dusk. Mitchell joined her. You could have crushed them, he said. You chose not to. Tiffany looked out across the field. Crushing is easy. Building is hard. You changed this place, Mitchell said. She shook her head. I exposed it. They chose what to do next. As she walked away for the last time, the academy stood quieter but stronger. Some lessons don't need shouting. They need truth. And truth, once faced, leaves no room for arrogance to survive. Months later, the impact of that single confrontation was still being felt across the academy. New cadets arrived with a different energy. There was less swagger, fewer jokes whispered at someone else's expense, and more quiet observation. The story of the woman in the courtyard had become an unspoken warning and an unexpected source of respect. Tiffany Ross returned briefly for a leadership symposium, invited not as an investigator but as an example. She stood before a room filled with young men and women who listened differently now, not because they feared her rank, but because they understood what she represented. Strength, she told them, isn't measured by how loudly you dominate a room. It's measured by how responsibly you hold power when no one is forcing you to. In the back row, a young cadet who had witnessed the original incident nodded slowly, realizing how close he had come to following the wrong example. Others took notes, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to remember. Outside the auditorium, a plaque was quietly installed near the training yard. It didn't mention names or punishments. It carried a simple message. Leadership begins where arrogance ends. No ceremonies announced it. No speeches accompanied its unveiling. But every cadet who passed it felt its weight. Tiffany left the academy that evening as she had first arrived, without spectacle. But this time she left behind something permanent. Not fear. Not shame. Standards. And long after the memory of disgraced cadets faded, the lesson remained etched not just in stone, but in the mindset of a new generation of soldiers who understood that respect is not demanded at gunpoint, but earned through discipline, humility, and unwavering integrity. The final transformation did not happen overnight. True change never does. It happened quietly, day by day, in small decisions that no one applauded. It happened when cadets corrected one another instead of laughing, when they spoke up instead of looking away, when respect became instinct instead of obligation. And at the center of it all, without demanding attention or credit, stood Commander Tiffany Ross. 1 year after the incident in the courtyard, the Naval Academy held its annual graduation ceremony. Families filled the stands, proud and hopeful. Flags waved in the warm breeze. Brass instruments gleamed under the sun. It looked like every other graduation day from the outside. But inside the institution, everything was different. Colonel Mitchell stood at the podium, scanning the formation. He saw discipline where arrogance once stood, focus where entitlement once lingered. He saw cadets who had learned sometimes painfully that leadership was not about dominance but responsibility. He cleared his throat. "Before we proceed," he said, "there is one final recognition." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Please welcome Commander Tiffany Ross." Applause erupted, not the forced kind, not the polite kind, but the deep, sustained applause reserved for someone whose reputation speaks before they do. Tiffany stepped forward slowly, wearing her uniform with the same quiet dignity she always carried. She did not smile. Not yet. "Commander Ross," Mitchell continued, "was sent here on a classified mission to observe. What she uncovered reshaped this academy. What she built reshaped its future." He turned to the cadets. "Every reform you trained under, every standard you were held to, every uncomfortable conversation you were forced to have with yourself started with her courage." The applause grew louder. Tiffany raised a hand and the noise faded. She stepped to the microphone. "I didn't come here to be admired," she said calmly. "And I didn't come here to punish." Her eyes moved across the rows of cadets. "I came here because soldiers deserve leaders who see them as human beings, not extensions of ego or entitlement." She paused. "You are graduating into a world that will test you in ways no classroom ever could. You will command people who don't look like you, who don't think like you, who didn't grow up with what you had." Her voice hardened slightly. "And one day your decisions will decide whether someone lives or dies." The field was silent. "In that moment," she continued, "your last name won't matter. Your family history won't matter. Your excuses won't matter." She leaned closer to the microphone. "Only your character will." She stepped back. The ceremony continued, but something invisible had shifted. The words stayed. Miles away, in a small apartment far from military pageantry, Tyler Brennan watched the ceremony on a cracked laptop screen. He recognized the courtyard behind Tiffany. He recognized the academy crest. And he recognized her. He watched in silence as the crowd applauded. A year ago, he had stood in that same academy believing the world owed him something. Now he worked 2 jobs. No uniform. No rank. No future guaranteed by inheritance. For a long time he had blamed her. But blame is easy. Growth is not. He closed the laptop and stared at his hands that had once held a training weapon with arrogance, not understanding its weight. For the first time he admitted the truth to himself. She hadn't ruined his life. She had exposed it. That night, Tiffany stood alone near the training yard where it had all begun. The plaque still stood there, quiet and unassuming. Leadership begins where arrogance ends. Colonel Mitchell joined her, hands behind his back. You know, he said, there was resistance at first. From donors, alumni, some very powerful people. She nodded. There always is. But they can't argue with results, he continued. Performance is up. Attrition is down. Trust between units has improved. He looked at her. You changed the culture. She shook her head gently. I gave it a mirror. They stood in silence for a moment. Do you ever get tired? Mitchell asked. Fighting the same battles? Tiffany looked out at the empty yard. Every day, she said honestly. But I remember why I started. She thought of her father. Of the promise she made standing beside his grave. Of every soldier she carried out of fire. Of every time she had to prove she belonged. I don't do this for people like Tyler, she continued. I do this for the ones who never get a chance because someone decides they don't belong. Mitchell nodded, understanding completely. Years later, Tiffany Ross stood before a Senate committee, presenting the national expansion of her leadership protocols. The program had been adopted across multiple military branches. Data filled the screens behind her hard numbers, proving what she had always known. Inclusion was not weakness. It was force multiplication. A senator leaned forward. Commander Ross, she said, what would you say to those who still believe these changes lower standards? Tiffany met her gaze without hesitation. I would say they misunderstand standards, she replied. Excellence isn't exclusive. It's demanding. She paused. When you remove bias, you don't lower the bar. You finally see who can actually reach it. The room fell silent. Then, slowly, heads nodded. On the anniversary of the courtyard incident, Tiffany returned once more to the academy, not as an investigator, not as a reformer, but as a guest. A young black cadet approached her afterward, eyes bright with nervous determination. Commander Ross, she said, I just wanted to say, because of you I never questioned whether I belonged here. Tiffany smiled softly for the first time that day. You belong, she said. And one day you'll make sure others know it too. As Tiffany walked away, she knew something important. The battle she fought that day in the courtyard was never about humiliation or revenge. It was about legacy. Not the kind written in books or medals, but the kind written in people. And long after names were forgotten and controversies faded, the lesson remained quiet, unyielding, and powerful. True strength does not threaten. True leadership does not mock. And those who mistake arrogance for authority will always be unprepared for the moment. They meet someone who earned their power the hard way. That day, a group of rookies learned why you should never threaten a Navy SEAL, but the world learned something far more important. Respect is not given by force. It is demanded by character.